All right. Good evening. And as always, thanks for joining. My topic title tonight is Inner Demons. And I'm sure that that's going to stir up a whole bunch of opinions and thoughts thinking about that idea. But I think this is going to be a worthwhile conversation. And so thanks for joining. If you, during at any time in the podcast, have questions, comments, we encourage you to use the chat box for that. We do see those live, and we'll respond.
I do want to jump in because I see yummy yogurt there, and I just want to say my favorite yummy yogurt. Thank you for joining us. I love yummy yogurt. It's my favorite.
Yes, we often actually talk about yummy yogurt right after the podcast. So yeah, thanks for joining. So Inner Demons, August 6th this year. Most of you may have seen this. I actually came across this article and I thought it was hilarious, so I noted it and I'm using it. But a football player in Arkansas practicing out in preseason football, so everybody's getting ready. He's practicing, and apparently was practicing for about an hour when he started noticing that something was moving in his helmet, and so they.
I did read that.
Did you hear about this? Yeah. So he took his helmet off.
I didn't know he put it on, though. I just saw the type.
He was practicing for almost an hour. Apparently he had this thing on.
Right.
Takes it off and realizes there is a venomous copperhead snake in the padding of his helmet. And so they had to call a professional over. They took the helmet, they submerged it underwater and held it under there while the copperhead, came out eventually, and they were able to catch it and do what they do with copperheads. I'm not quite sure what they do with venomous snakes when they catch them. Probably just release them somewhere else. But anyway, the reason why that's interesting for this topic tonight is that it's possible to have something very dangerous living on the inside,
yes,
and not know it, and be functioning and living life and not realizing the damage it can cause, or when it does cause the damage, having realized I could have avoided this if I just dealt with it earlier, or at least known about it earlier. And so thinking about this title, there is a big difference between what people show on the outside, and I'll even say from a personal perspective, see on the outside, what we see ourselves producing, what we are doing on a daily basis, the level of functionality and productivity and social activity that we are able to perform on a regular basis might be very contrasted, or might contrast greatly between what's happening on the outside and what's happening on the inside. And so you can be functioning, acting like a nice person, working, producing, making money, raising a family, but on the inside be completely torn up and not know how to deal with it. And the Bible actually draws out this disparity often. There's a scripture that I just I'm listening to the Bible in audio right now. In Proverbs 21, it says, every way of a man may be right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart.
Yeah.
And so it's the idea of man being able, from his perspective, say, I'm doing fine, everything's fine, because you're living outwardly. But the Bible says that God specifically looks at the heart. Another scripture in the New Testament mentions this idea of people having their conscience seared with a hot iron.
Yeah.
And so in other words, that inner voice that tells you right and wrong, right, just thinking about it simply, could be seared to where you don't even know the difference anymore.
Yeah.
And so you're unable to identify the issues that are going on the inside. So the point I'm making is that who you are on the outside and who you are on the inside could very well be two different people. And so that might be oversimplifying it, but I think it just communicates the right idea. I want to talk about the issue of having problems on the inside that are undealt with, and how to properly find them, properly deal with them. How to identify them and how to actually deal with them. From a pastor's perspective, I mentioned this last week, and honestly, we draw on this quite often, is that your experience in working with people, you get to observe people. I think in our next podcast topic might be something on the level of like how to become an observer and properly utilize that.
Oh, that'll be fun.
So
that will be fun.
This idea though that being a people person and working with people requires you to observe people, right? And you have to learn habits and patterns and natures and tendencies and things that people, do that can lead them down the right road or wrong road. You have to pick up on both of those.
Yeah.
And so my question right off the bat is, based on your observation of people, what are some, like, we'll just call them like the negative or the dangerous ways people deal with or cope with internal problems that don't actually solve the problem?
Well, I would say probably the most dangerous is ignoring it, not wanting to deal with it, ignore it, compartmentalize. That's, a lot of people do this, is they're, so you have this sort of, compartments in your life, and you have all these things that you like about yourself, and so they're over here, but you've got this compartment of things that you don't like, or problems or issues that you have, that it's kind of a closet more than an actual thing. You put it in there. It comes out, it's there, but you basically ignore it anytime that it manifests itself. So if you're a person who has a temper, for example, you have a temper. It becomes part of your personality, but you would tell people, I don't have a temper, but they would see you, get mad, and they would see you break things, and they would see you go off. And it would be, the response would be, which is typical, is, yeah, but that was just that one time, or that was because of this particular situation. And so that's probably the most dangerous that I would think of from that standpoint of levels of danger, because the most dangerous things in your life are the things that you ignore, the things that you are aware of and can't do anything about. That's the next, but that's not as bad, because at least you're acknowledging it.
What are some other things? What are some like practical things that people do? So like that's kind of like in the realm of like thinking and acknowledge when things happening, you're just like pushing on that's not actually happening, almost gaslighting the observation, like we're talking about. But like what are some things that people, what are some other things people do that like that maybe attempt to deal with a problem but don't properly?
Well, okay, so probably another, now that we're just kind of opening it up, another danger is to deal with it on your own way, based on your own life experience or thinking, and that's probably, for me as a pastor, that's probably one of the things that I see as the most common problem that people have. It's not as dangerous as ignoring it, but it's a common problem, is just to deal with it in the way that you think you should deal with it. And then your tendency is to, I don't know how to exactly to describe it, but you come up with your own way of doing it. It's funny because, like, there's this thing, that's been said over the years, and I've heard it many times of people, that, men never ask for directions and they never read instructions, and when I heard that, and I heard that a lot, especially, in my 20s, I would hear pastors preach about that. I would think, that's really not an intelligent way to live life, because people, when you buy a product, right? If it comes with a manual, which a lot of stuff doesn't anymore, but if it comes with a manual, there's a reason why it comes with a manual. Because if it was just intuitive, you wouldn't need a manual, or put things together. You've got extra screws and things like that. But unless you're a structural engineer, you're building IKEA furniture, and you say, oh, I don't need these extra pieces. And it's like, well, having a bit of an engineering background, number one, I know that they make things as cheap as possible. So every screw that's unnecessary has already been removed.
Yeah.
So what you're putting together is now bordering in the realm of dangerous, because you're leaving all these screws, I don't need all these screws. I get it, that there is, some things are, you're not using it for its intended purpose. You're using it for something much more lighter, it's more maybe decorative, but it's built to be actually purpose built, and and you're not using it for a purpose, so that's not a big deal. But for the most part, having that kind of an attitude of, I'm just going to put it together my way. I'm just going to live life my way. I'm just going to work things out my way. That kind of an approach to life is, you're not going to build much of a life. And I used to use this so much that I actually stopped using it as a phrase, but the idea of blazing your own trail. There are people, they're literally going to spend their entire lives driving on the frontage road of life, thinking that they're actually building a road, building a freeway, but they're not. The freeway's right next to them, and if they got on the freeway, and that freeway is other people, examples, other people teaching you how to do things. And there's a lot of people, they just can't do that. They just can't live there. It's funny because it's a subject that I've preached on a lot, and I've been a pastor for a long period of time and preaching sermons and realizing, I've probably preached, something that individuals have heard 30, 40, 50 times. And it doesn't even move the needle in their life anymore. When they hear a sermon having to do with something like that, I can see that they sort of visibly disconnect. I can tell they pick up their phone, they start doing stuff on their phone. If there's somebody else who comes and, it's somebody who's preaching and, it's all happy, stuff. And like, they're right there. Oh yes, amen. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. But when it comes to actual practical, real life help, they can't be bothered because they've already decided this is how they're going to be. And having been a pastor, for 30 years, but being a pastor in one place for 10 years, another for 5, another place for 18. And so having some longevity and realizing, people, and even to this day, people from when I was in Liverpool, I'll hear about them and they haven't changed. There's nothing different about their lives. I met them when they were in their 20s and now they're in their 50s and they're the same. They're absolutely have gray hair, have been married, some even divorced, kids have grown up, and they're the same. They're absolutely the same. And the kids that they've produced are just a mess. And you could never tell them anything. There's just nothing. They just wouldn't hear it. Everything has to be on their terms. I'm going to do life my way. And it's like, yeah, but it isn't working. It's like, I don't care. As long as I do it my way, that's all that matters. And, I heard a story once of a guy who, he was living, he was a Christian and decided to go back into the world, give up on Christianity. He's living in a trailer surrounded by beer cans and dope and stuff. He's by himself. He's older now. He's like in his later years, 50s, 60s. And it was another pastor who went to go see him. And he said, look at how you're living your life. And he said, he literally looked at him and he said, I don't care that I have to live like this as long as I don't have to do what other people say. And it's like, good for you. Good for you. Bravo. You have a useless waste of a life, but you decide what you're going to do. It's sad. It's really sad.
I think that reality is actually what kind of snapped me into the possibility of listening to other people. Was thinking about homeless people and thinking this is the road I'm going down.
Yeah.
It's like, being on drugs and like a lot of internal problems that now came out to the surface. And it's like, I don't want to deal with these anyway. And so I'm just going to do things my way. This is the direction I'm going to go in my life. And if for some reason I started seeing that as the very possible ending of my life. I was going to be homeless. One of those guys, I got kids and stuff. I don't ever see them and sad story.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, so what part would you say blame plays in how people process
blaming others? You mean that? Oh yeah, that will follow in, like I said, in the two things that I kind of focused on, doing life your way and ignoring it.
It's just like the outflow of those two things.
It's the outflow, because you have to have a reason for why it failed. Yeah. It did fail. It failed. That's all there is to it. You're a loser. But it's got to be somebody's fault. It can't be the bad decisions that you made. It has to be somebody's, did something, somebody said something, somebody acted a certain way, and that's why you made all these bad decisions. And that's, yeah. So blame is just the outflow of that, because you can't look inside. Like what you said, I don't want to be homeless. What you're talking about there is a realization of, if I keep living life my way, doing it the way that I'm doing it, which doesn't work, I'm going to end up living this way for the rest of my life, and it's only going to get worse. And that, for whatever reason, for some people, they just can't go there. They just cannot go there in their minds. They cannot accept the fact that they need help, and that's it's the irony of it, because if you look at anyone who's, brilliant, successful, along the way, the one thing they know for a fact is that they are not alone on this planet. They need other people's help. They may have high standards, they may have awkward personalities, but they know that they need other people, or they cannot achieve. Because you cannot achieve without the help of other people. Whether that's in reading books, or taking courses, or whatever. So you see it all the time. It's funny to me to see people who are like, they really believe they're intelligent, but at the same time they will not listen to anybody else, any other person. It's everything is all, sound bites, YouTubes, articles on the internet, Google searches, ChatGPT, stuff, like little snippets, of information, and it's enough for them to feel, intelligent. But the box that it checks is, which is a box that shouldn't be checked, is, I'm brilliant and nobody helped me. And it's a foolish place to be.
It's kind of interesting, like thinking about, kind of want to talk about like identifying, right, internal problems. And I was thinking about like symptoms that are caused by things happening on the inside. And our body's like a very good communicator, right? It's like, if there's something going on the inside, your body will literally express it. And so when you have internal physical issues, you have external symptoms where you can say something's wrong. 3 of my kids now have all had this random stomach bug. And it's very interesting because, 1 minute they're active, they're social, they want to do so. And then all of a sudden it's like just click, they're throwing up, diarrhea, they're lethargic, they don't want to do anything, appetite's gone, or the appetite's there but their stomach can't handle it. And so their body is telling them something's on the inside that's wrong. And so physically we have these like very good indicators something's wrong on the inside. How do you identify symptoms when the problem is not physical, it's mental or spiritual? It's
I don't know that I would agree that it's not physical.
Well, you know what I'm saying. No,
I know you mean it's not mechanical.
Mechanical is probably the right
that there's a physical part of your
kind of
body
hard to make
isn't working.
A clear line between those two anyway, because the ones do kind of intertwine easily. But
but because even though there's not a body part that's not working, there are other parts that are not working. Like, for probably one of the biggest example is relationships. You can tell how well a person is doing by the number of personal relationships, genuine relationships with people. There are people that are in their 60s and they only actually have, maybe 2 or 3 people in their lives that are actually, they have relationships with. And in many cases, it's family members. It's just family members. They don't actually know anybody else, really. They might have a phone list, with hundreds of people in the phone list, but they probably only call actually 1 or 2 of those with any kind of regularity. And talking, personally, living in the same city or whatever is very, very rare. Getting together with different people Very, very rare. And so that's, for people that are not doing well. And so that's what I mean about the idea of it not having some physical, because it's clear there are clear physical indicators. Somebody who only knows one or two people with any kind of regularity, obviously they have problems. I mean, obviously they have problems. It's not maybe they have problems. It's obviously they have problems, because they're not able to have relationships with anybody. And so, because relationships are what bring out issues, so I've noticed you haven't been acting like you normally act, kind of a thing. So they can tell when there's a change. They can tell when so you've got another voice, in your life. Hey, how you doing? It's funny because it's sad, because our church isn't a big church, but it's sad that I'll realize that somebody isn't at church, but it may be a half an hour into the service. And the reason is because they just don't have any relationships with anybody. They come and go when they please. They're not really involved in anything. And so you don't notice when they're there. And so therefore you don't notice when they're not there, because they're just kind of a part of it. And when they're gone, they're like, so it's funny, like, beginnings and ends of services, as we're setting up and breaking down, and you realize so-and-so's not here. And it's like, where did they go? And they just left, they just left or weren't there, or whatever, and don't say hi and bye when they come. They just kind of come in, sit down, get up, go out, and that's an indicator of a problem. You're talking about somebody who actually has a problem. And so that's because people who don't have a problem, that they say hi and goodbye. That's normal. And the reason why they say hi and goodbye is because they care about those people that they're around, and so they're going to interact. You interact with people you care about. And when you don't care about anybody, that's an indicator that, you've got some kind of problem. It's not how you were born or how you were raised or your makeup or whatever. It doesn't matter where you are, on the spectrum of things. You're gonna have friends, if you are okay, because even nobody's perfect. We all have our own little problems and issues.
So what else? What are some other symptoms? Relationships is obviously a really big one, but just thinking about, like, other indicators. I obviously love seeing what ChatGPT comes in with this stuff. Like, and honestly, a lot of it has consequence toward relationships.
Yeah.
Things like it. This is just coming from ChatGPT, but like, pride. There's
well, yeah, that's the inner things, but you never know that you have pride,
right? So how do you what are some things like along those lines that are like expressions of internal problems that?
Well, but that's the thing is so things like happiness, sadness, pride, these kinds of things. You need another person involved in this, to actually see it. Otherwise, you won't see it. I have a friend of mine who he's not a smiler, and people always ask him, how come you never smile? And he says, what do you mean? I'm smiling right now. Because the shape of his face, it's down like that, and he's always like this. He looks like this, and so it's like he can't help it. So for him to smile, it just kind of looks normal, so it's like, but the only way he would know that is if somebody said something. And so you have to have relationships with people. And as a pastor, it's a very, it's an obvious negative. People in his church had to get used to him, and he's pastored in several churches, and he always has to get used to that thing. And he tries, to be cordial and to be nice and stuff. And it's just like, so how's it going? And he's got that look, and it's like, what's wrong, Pastor? And it's like, nothing's wrong. And he's like, well, why do you look like that? He's like, just the way my face looks,
It's just my face.
That's the smile, hey, what's going on? How's everything going? He has to make sure that he smiles before talking, or else people think, oh, something's up. My wife, I'm in the car sometimes driving, and I'm thinking, and she'll go, she doesn't do it as much anymore, but she used to go, "Oh, you have your El Pastor face on," because it's usually when we're on our way to church. And I'm thinking about what I'm going to preach. I'm thinking about how people are doing. I'm thinking about people that I want to, connect with to make sure they're okay, different things. So I'm thinking on the way to church, trying to get ready for church. And she always, "You're El Pastor," it's like, as always, my face just goes into this very serious mode, when I'm thinking.
Such a wife thing to say.
Well, it's good to have a wife like that who's not afraid of me. So,
well, I can definitely say I have a wife that's not afraid of me. Oh goodness. So I probably shouldn't have said that. So let's talk about dealing with them for a second. What do you think is like the driver in a person who does? And I'm not, this doesn't have to be unique to people who obviously hit on all cylinders and they're always just dealing with their problems correctly. Like you said, we all have different levels of how we deal with this and how we're going to process our own problems. But what do you think is the real driver? Like, what's the thing inside of somebody that should be there or should be active and motivating you to see problems like that and go, you know what, I want to deal with this. I don't want to be like this.
Yeah. So the first thought that comes to my mind is the idea, the understanding that, at the end of the day, and it doesn't matter where you are on this, and maybe if you're listening and you don't believe in God, just take a minute to take this on board, because you may not believe in God, but you know that you don't know for a fact that God doesn't exist. And so let's just go with it for a minute, that there is a life past this life. And you're either going to be in heaven or you're going to be in hell. And if you're in hell, okay, well, you don't need to really worry about it. But if you're going to be in heaven and you have any idea or thought that you're going to be in heaven, you're going to be there forever. And one of the things that's very clear in Scripture is that there's this kind of, in the book of Revelations, it makes this very interesting statement. It says, he who, I'm paraphrasing it a little bit, but it says, he who is wicked, let him be wicked still. And he who is righteous, let him be righteous still. In other words, there's this sort of stop, you are what you are walking into eternity. You are what you are. And so in having that, that understanding that you are what you are, you should be, and I know that this is what motivates my life, is you should be wanting to improve your life as long as you're on the earth. There should not be a point like you get to be, okay, I'm like in my life, okay, I'm a grandfather, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I've worked various jobs, I'm a pastor, I've been involved in all kinds of levels of ministry and involvement in helping people. I have arrived. I don't need to change anymore. That's, to think that way is wrong, because I want to keep improving. As long as I'm alive, I want to keep improving. And so far, so good. I mean, in every way, body, soul, and spirit, I've been focused on improvement. And that improvement comes from standards outside of myself. And so what I mean by that is, what is sort of socially acceptable, and I know that you can say, oh, well, what about this and what about that? But there's the idea, generally speaking, there are, socially acceptable things. And social, I don't mean cultural. I mean, if I flew to Japan or I flew to China or I flew to Russia and I start interacting with people, I want to be the kind of personality that no matter where I go, people find me cordial, not American. That was one of the, when I lived in England, I really began to understand the American, and I remember, this is a little while ago now, I was in Russia. This is back in the 90s. Things were quite a bit different then. And there's a guy, you didn't even have to tell me. He is from Texas. How do I know he's from Texas? He's got a huge, massive belt buckle and this huge cowboy hat. and a big, huge cigar. And he's walking around he wants to buy a cart. They're $1 for the cart. And he wants a cart, but he doesn't have $1. And in Russia, they won't take a $5 bill. They only take $1 bills. And so he's like, what are you talking about? Don't you understand? A $5 bill is worth more than a $1 bill. What kind of an idiot are you? And he's going on like this. And I thought, oh my word, this isn't about whether it's worth more or not. This guy's not going to keep the money. He's not, if he was keeping it, he'd take the 5. It said he's got to put this in a drawer, and his boss is going to be upset when he sees a $5 bill in there because they're only supposed to take $1 bills. That's it. Simple. But this guy, on and on, was like, the ugly American, classic ugly American. And so I sold him my cart for $5 and bought another one for $1.
Really?
Yeah.
That works. That works well. So
that was an ugly American, but in a different way. That was covert.
Yeah.
Nobody there knew. They didn't. It didn't mess with the Russian psyche. It was okay. That was one American to another.
That works. So, what would you say is like I think probably the only straight way to say it is what from a. I want to try and find the difference between like, what is it that how does Christianity deal with problems on the inside versus the rest of the world? Is there a difference? Is there like a
Well, I'll probably jump the gun on that with my internal reference of talking about eternity, but because that is the real issue. Is that if there is
motivator, right?
Because if there is no eternity, and this is a thing that's interesting to me because I wonder if, I always refer back to this. It is definitely an old man thing to do this, but it's there's certain illustrations that just stick forever, in my mind. And one of them is, it was a Christian, you'll know it because I've mentioned it before, Christian play, Heaven's Gates and Hell's Flames. And the play is being put on by Christians. But the interesting thing about the way that this play is done is that you actually are given room to ad lib. And so you can ad lib your part. And so this person who's supposed to have been a Christian dies and is standing before Jesus and says, "You are real." I'm like, oh my word. It's like, I don't know, I should probably be careful with it. It could simply be overacting, trying to pretend, you are a Christian as opposed to being a real Christian. But my first thought was, so you don't know if Jesus is real, but here you are doing this play, trying to get people saved, get in, and just all that. But the idea of God being real and how Christianity plays into it is that what the Bible says is true. You reap what you sow. There's a truth, understood that you reap what you sow. And so when you are a jerk, don't be surprised when you receive the rewards of a jerk. It's how life goes. It's not, and it's funny because it's not something that a lot of Christians really understand. But the idea of knowing people by their fruits, and a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, is a principle, of Scripture, and it's very helpful for self-regulation, because when you see garbage happening through your life, you're a bad tree. You need to change. It's not, oh, this is just my flesh, this is just my lower nature, I'm not perfect, stuff like that. No, it's the fruit of who you are. It's the fruit of your life. And you should pay attention to that. And that, that again goes back to that reference point of eternity, but it's also in this life as well. If you want to, you have to understand that how you behave. Let's put it this way. You get the life that you deserve. I mean, you could say, oh, what about, people who have this or that? When I say you get the life that you deserve, what I'm talking about is I'm not talking about the circumstances and the situations that happen in life, because sometimes you can have some very bad experiences. But what I'm talking about is how much pleasure, how much genuine joy that you get out of life, is as much as you deserve by how you are. If you're not developing as a person, if you're not growing as a person, then you have no room to complain about, man, why is my life going the way that it's going, and why am I having the problems that I'm having? And this is something that new Christians have a hard time with, is they become Christians and then they want to know how come all their problems haven't gone away. And it's like, well, because you haven't changed all that much yet. You've made some good decisions, but give it some time and let the fruit of that grow. Let that begin to bear fruit in your life, and it will eventually come out, but it's not going to come out in a day. You want to eat your own avocados, grown by yourself. Well, you're going to have to hang around for 10 years or more to make a tree. It's not going to just happen. You're not going to plant a seed and in a couple of weeks you're going to have avocados. It doesn't work like that. And the same thing's true about, the fruit of who we are. And so if there's bad fruit being born in your life and you change how you are, you're going to have to be patient and wait. And then that fruit will come to pass. You'll begin to reap the fruit of that. And I can say personally that I've learned that, over the years in my own life. The fruit of my life is not my circumstances, but the inner sense of wellness, of just knowing, that my life is going in a good direction, that I like Paul says, I have no regrets. I've lived in clear conscience, for the last 40 years. I'm not looking back with regret at anything that I've done, any decisions that I've made, and I'm reaping the benefits and the blessings of that. I'm not wealthy, and I'm not popular. Those aren't, like I said, those aren't a part of the package. But internally, I'm at peace. And I hate to say it like that, because I know that there's all, the whole, guru type thinking, of peace. And it's not being problem free. It's learning how to be able to make your way through life without worry, without anxiety. I'm never anxious, and I never worry. It's not like, oh, what if this doesn't work, or what if this doesn't come out? Everything is very academic, in how I view those kinds of things.
Question that's come in. I'll just read it out here. It says, "Sorry, I'm late." No problem, by the way.
Don't know that.
I know. That's true. We have no idea how long you've been observing us or watching. Have you covered strongholds that demons create in us when we are involved in sin over time?
I see. Sorry, so late. Yeah. So no, we haven't. So say it again, so I get the full.
Yeah. Have you covered strongholds that demons create in us when we are involved in sin over time?
Okay, so we're kind of inner demons. Just to clarify, the direction we've been going are more the sort of the general idea, the general thought. You can blame Jordan for his making the demons red, because he wanted to clickbait, and so I didn't say anything.
We're just touching on the realistic.
I let him do his clickbaiting. But when we're talking about the general idea, we're not talking so much specifically about the demonic in general, but there is a truth there, and that probably is important to put into this, is that there's a reason why that phrase inner demons exists, even at a secular level, because it has come out of the idea of literally having demonic oppression. And so that's I think it's something that we should go ahead and address. And so I'm glad for the comment question. The idea of the demonic, see, it's not exclusive to Christians. Something I always talk about is this idea that if you're non-Christian, then you don't believe in God, therefore you're free. You're free. You don't have to worry about any of the things that Christians worry about because you're free. It's like, that's just ridiculous. I often ask people, I'll pick some obscure place. Have you been to Myanmar? No. Well, how do you know it exists? Oh, because it's on the map. Well, how do you know they didn't lie to you? Oh, well, are they going to lie on every map that's ever been made? And then I just keep going with the same kind of logic that people use when it comes to God. Is every believer a liar? Those kinds of things. So I'm bringing all that stuff out. So the idea of the demonic isn't some, pitchforked red, suit, entity, creeping around. It's a strategy, and if you want to go listen, I did a sermon on this about a week ago on demonology, to help people to understand that we're talking about super intelligent beings here. We're talking about super intelligent beings that don't want to serve God. We're not talking about, archaic, old-fashioned ideas and thoughts. We're talking, to put it in modern vernacular, we're talking about what people call aliens. Okay, they are aliens. They just happen to be known as angels. They've always existed. People ask, so do you believe in aliens? It's like, well, angels are aliens. They would definitely be aliens to us. They are super intelligent. They are supernatural, and so so all of that does play into this. And so the idea of what happens inside of you, is the most important thing, because when we talk about inside, it's probably to put everything on a proper level here. We're not thinking of this hollow body that things live inside of. We're talking about the mind predominantly. We're talking about the mind. I think we also can include the soul in that as well. But we're talking about the inner person, the inner personality that can be hijacked by the demonic. And so all the things that we're talking about, all play into that. This is why there are people that have anger problems. This is why there are people that are depressed. This is why these various things happen. They're not just simply psychological disorders. These are things that are touching the soul, and it's a soul that is damaged, and it's a soul that has been damaged and corrupted because of sin, because of disobedience to God, because of various things that we do, and they create all this.
So, the next question. Sometimes you just got to trust the process a little bit. I wasn't necessarily hoping to just stick with the direction we were going. My next question actually has to do with not necessarily demon possession, but getting more into the realm of what salvation entails. Because if I were to argue this from like a, playing the devil's advocate, no pun intended, but like, how do you explain this when it comes to, so Jesus talks about when a demon is cast out of a man, right? It goes out and searches for places to land. It's almost as if he's inferring that like, that is what demons are intending to do, to occupy people, to influence the inside of the person, right? And so how do you determine the difference between people who aren't saved, they're living in full, we'll just say, either blatant rejection of God or by default rejection of God. They don't follow God, they don't follow Jesus, but they don't have any like blatant signs of this internal problem. They're not foaming at the mouth. They're not, speaking in random languages, and but they express some of these soul issues that you're talking about, and like there are symptoms of something happening on the inside. There is, but how do you determine the difference between those two? They have good relationships, they have friends, they have, so if I was like a person in the world and I was thinking about this from this perspective of like self-defense, like, wait a second, like I have relationships with people and I don't have all these deep internal problems. What are you talking about? Like, what is the difference?
What is the difference?
Yeah, what's the difference between, because we're talking about people in church.
Well, I don't think we're
versus-
talking. Yeah, I think what we're talking about right there with your question, I think, is the difference between binary and linear thinking.
Hmm.
Binary thinking is I am this, I am not that. I fit either in a category. And so, for example, I'll make a blanket statement. All homeless people have mental problems. Okay? There's no such thing as being a homeless person and not having mental problems, because the two go hand in hand, because you're not living the way that you were designed by God to live. And so we're meant to be a part of a society. Homeless people are not a part of a society. They're wandering aimlessly, and they may meet other homeless people and hang out for a while, but then they'll eventually drift and go somewhere else. It's they're not building relationships. That if having done so, you talk to homeless people, they're always talking in past tense about family. They haven't seen their family for a long period of time. Usually, they've lost connection with their family. They're as far as trying to talk to them about getting out of that condition. The longer they've been in it, the more they rationalize that situation. I'm never going to get out of this because I have to do this. I remember it was funny. It was in England. I asked somebody, I said, how can you be homeless? Because every single person in England gets money. There's no such thing as a person that doesn't get money. And so it was like, how in the world could you be homeless? Because they will pay your rent. They will pay your groceries. If you don't have any money or you have nothing, they will pay, for things that you need, and so how in the world can you be homeless? And what I was told is, well, I there's a period of time, one individual told me there's a period of time between receiving money and, having to pay bills. And so I got kicked out because I didn't have the money. But once I got kicked out of the place that I was living, I didn't have an address anymore. And because I didn't have an address, they wouldn't give me the money because I needed to have an address in order to have the money. And it's like, okay, do you not have family that has a place that you could live? And that was the issue, is that they didn't know anybody that was willing to put them up. And the reason is because they've gone a bit crazy and they can't be lived with anymore, because they've got certain habits and certain things that are going on in their lives now that are no longer socially acceptable. And so they have to live on their own. They can't live with somebody else. Somebody living with them would just drive that person nuts. And so, but my point for saying it that way is to answer the question, what about the person who's like this but is normal? And my response to that is there's no such thing. There's no such thing as I don't do that, I don't do this, I don't do the other thing. But I'm still doing very well. There's no such person that's doing very well in that sense. And so if you want to qualify that, that's fine. But I mean, that's my answer to that, is that I don't think that person exists.
So now what about how common is, demonic influence? I've actually, maybe we talked about this, but I can't remember.
Well, this is the issue. So that this is what I was saying, is this idea. So we walk by, or we're on when we go out and we're on the street corner and we're playing music, and people walk by and they go, "Oh my God, Christians! Oh my God, go home!" And they'll say stuff like that. That's demonic. That's demonic. The person wouldn't look at that as being demonic. And the reason why I know that's demonic is because I've done that. I've actually done that, because before I became a Christian, I was not friendly to Christians. And so I remember walking by, and again, there's another one of these old man moments because I mentioned a lot, but it's such a reference point. I remember coming out of a concert. I had been drinking. I had been taking drugs of various kinds, not just smoking pot, various kinds. I think it was on LSD, and I'm walking, and I'm by myself. I was with other people when I went to that concert, but now I'm by myself, and to this day I have no idea how come I was at this concert by myself. Which again, that idea, just filters into everything we've been talking about. So I'm walking out, and there's people, and I don't even know what they're saying. It's their spirits. The only way I can describe it. It's what's coming off of them. This sort of cleanness and happiness thing, that's coming off of them. And I'm walking by, and I thought, God, what a bunch of losers. And just walked away thinking these people are stupid. And there was no reason for me to think that way. There was absolutely none whatsoever, because it wasn't that, oh, I see you. I've seen many people like you. I have friends that are like you. I've had lots of experience with people like you. There was none of that. I'd never seen people actually standing out on the street preaching. I have had people come to my door, and I wasn't very happy about them coming to my door. But it seemed anybody talking about Jesus was an idiot to me. And that was demonic. It was demonic. That didn't come from me. I didn't logically figure all that out. That was demonically inspired. And it was to keep me from becoming a Christian. The devil was working very well, very successfully in my life. I'm going nowhere. I'm becoming nothing. And my life is drifting along in life. And the longer you drift like that, like I said, the more crazy you get. And so that's what's happening in my life. But there's demonic influence there. But there was no manifestations, not like what people think of. I'm not frothing at the mouth and things like that. But it's coloring my perception of life. And it's having influence, and I'm seeing myself as a good person, not in need of what they have, while I am, slowly decaying at the same time. And yet I'm not able to put all the pieces together. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about, the demonic, and the involvement, the influence of the demonic, is understanding that it's just the because the Bible says that the devil, that's what one of the things that I mentioned talking about demonology, the devil came to steal, to kill, and to destroy. And so that's what I was doing, as I'm looking at these people, destroying them. It's a thought that destroys. I'm not thinking maybe they're good people, maybe there's a good reason why they're out here. There's nothing good or nice about anything that I'm thinking. It's destructive, and it's the character of the devil to just destroy. And this is what people do when people are bitter, when people are constantly upset at people, when people won't forgive other people. They're manifesting demonic influence. It's third person. It's like they agree with it. That's the issue, is they agree with this demonic way of being, but the inspiration for that came directly from the devil, or from demons.
And the question that came up is, how do you minister to a person like that to bring deliverance?
Well,
this was just
I was asked a similar question before, or a couple of days ago, about this. You cannot help somebody who doesn't want help. And so, as much as I would like to, and over the years, it's something that I've actually tried to do. But what I have learned is I will offer the right way. I will talk about the way that they're going and the downsides of that, and then let them decide. And, it's interesting. It's just, it's often, I'm especially with people who are showing interest in becoming Christians. I'll talk to them. I will lay things out. I'll spend endless hours, in the very beginning with them, and to answer questions and to communicate and try to give advice and try to set, a path for them to follow. But when it becomes clear, like one of the things that is often the case is that they just, text, "Hey, how's it going?" and they won't respond. And it's like, I'll do that a couple of times, and then if there's no response, then my my response is, "Okay, I get it. You've made your mind up, and all the best." And depending on the extent of our conversation, sometimes I will just simply tell them, "Okay, hey, learn the hard way. I tried to help you tried to help you by giving you information that I wish I had when I first became a Christian, and you rejecting it. So learn the hard way. Learn by rejecting truth, and see where that takes you." So you can't. I mean, you can't with people that are like that. It takes it needs to be a moment between them and God. It's the whole prodigal son idea. The father couldn't change the mind of his own son. He couldn't change his mind. He could just be prepared and ready for when his son did change his mind. He couldn't actually get him to change his mind. He had to go out, lose his inheritance, ruin his life, make an absolute mess of things, and then come back. And now he comes back broken. He'll never live to the potential that he could have, but he had to make that choice. And so, yeah, he's back. Yeah, it's great. And, the son that was dead is now alive, but that's it. He's never going to be that kind of person, and it's just kind of the way that it works.
And so how would you identify this? I'm going back to the identifying thing here, but for somebody that's not saved, like what do you say to, somebody's, they're not Christian, they're not, how do you help them identify that this is an internal problem you can't deal with on your own?
I try to find a loose thread. And what I mean by that is something they're willing to admit, something that they're willing to say, okay, yeah, I get it. I have some issues, and are willing to accept that, and then I'll try to pull on that thread in hopes that I can pull out something bigger, as we go along, that it's not just a little thing. There's other things that are attached to it, and I'll try to help them to understand. You can't, it's like a baby. You don't just take a baby and say, okay, you're 2 months old now. It's time to learn how to eat steak. You can't. There's nothing you can't do that. You have to be able to give them what they can handle. And so that's, like I said, that's what I try to do. Is I try to find some place where I can start. Where are they at? What are they willing to admit? What are they willing to accept about themselves to be able to move forward? And one of the difficulties is, that I found personally is when it comes to religion. With people who have a religious background are probably the hardest to help, because they've already learned all the catchphrases, and have latched onto those things. I believe in Jesus, and I'm not. I don't have PTSD, because I'm a Christian. It's things like that. It's just like it's impossible. I'm a believer in Jesus. The devil he can't do anything to me. That those kinds of things is very, very hard to do anything with when it comes to that. But I find it much easier with non-believers because they've experienced it. And the reason why I say that again is because out of my own experience, I know what it's like to. I don't know if anybody ever hits rock bottom, because and that's the scary part. That's why becoming a Christian to me, I was so grateful that God saved me, was because there really is no bottom. Over the years, I've watched people come in, make a mess of their lives. They come in, and they want to give their lives to Jesus, but they decide they want to got to do certain things. He doesn't do it. So they go back out in the world and their lives get worse. And then they come back and they try again. And it's still, God has still decided that he's not going to make things work the way they want him to. And so they go back out and then they come back in and they go back out and they come back in and they go through this cycle. And each time they come in worse. They come in worse. And it's not that they come in worse financially. It's not an issue of becoming in worse financially. They come in as a worse human being, more broken, more lost, more directionless, and just have no aim whatsoever in life. And they're just literally going nowhere, and it just won't break out of that cycle. Whereas with non-Christians, it's a lot easier because they're already admitting, you know what, I got issues, I got problems, and I need to deal with it. And like I said, that's where I was. And so when I got saved, there was no games. It was not, I wasn't that bad. I wasn't this, I wasn't that. And I didn't, throw expectations at God as, okay, now that I'm a Christian, you're going to let this happen. I just was willing to learn. I was willing to learn. I made mistakes, paid for it, and it was like, okay, well, live and learn. That was a mistake. I went at this the wrong direction. I'm thinking this God's going to really think this is a great idea, and it turns out not only is it not a great idea, it's a bad idea, and then I have to reap the bad fruit of that for a period of time, and it's like, this is on me. I'll just outlive it. I'm learning. I'm going to grow. God's going to help me, and just move forward.
Very cool. Well, stop there, and I think we covered quite a bit of ground, but generally speaking, as always, we appreciate folks joining, chiming in, asking questions. We will be here again next week. Like I said in the beginning, kind of a sneak peek, talking about learning how to be an observer, but we hope you can join us then. Nothing else, we do always have our open invitations for our services during the week, and also on Sunday morning, Sunday evening, we have separate services, and so be a part of one of those. We'd love to meet you, but if nothing else, we'll see you again next week.